Welcome to Livesense8. I'm Sheila and
I'm Zac Hansen.
In this podcast, we dive into the concepts of consciousness in the Netflix original series Sense8. We're going to go episode by episode, exploring how we can live a Sense8 life. And this is our episode 1.
Let the journey begin.
Yes, so we're here, finally, ready to dive into the whole series. Like, this is just a beginning. This is exciting, right?
It is. This first episode. So crazy. So confusing.
In the beginning, it was so confusing when I watched it the first time. And then, now that we've watched it several times, I love this episode.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because a friend of mine, when we were talking about starting the podcast and knowing that most people don't like the first 3 episodes, she's like, well, maybe you can put the first 3 in together, kind of brush over them so you don't lose people's attention. And I was kind of thinking, well, maybe we'll do that. And then I started diving in after having watched the whole series. And I'm like, oh my God, there is so much in this episode that I have to leave a ton of it for later because things get brought up again later. Like we could be here for days if we just did this episode.
We could, actually. I'm really excited to talk about the first scene because it's so important in my opinion, and of course the idea of limbic resonance.
Right. So the title of this episode is Limbic Resonance. In a sense that I think that's the title in a way that talks about the whole series, but why wouldn't you for the foundation of the first one? So let's just give a little background about this episode before we dive in. Again, the title is Limbic Resonance. It aired on June 5th, 2015. It was written by the Wachowskis and Michael J. Straczynski. The unpronounceable
Straczynski. So about that, I was really thinking, I was wondering why they didn't just go with Ski's Company.
Ooh.
Oh, a little play on Three's Company.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
Kind of punny.
But I love the unpronounceable.
Right, it's good. It is.
Anyway, okay, so it was directed by the Wachowskis. And in this episode, 8 strangers from cities around the globe begin having experiences that defy explanation. Or does it? Maybe there is some explanation, but we don't know in the beginning. We're going to just read a very quick overview of limbic resonance because we want to talk about that. Like, what does that mean? It is so key to this, and it kind of gets, you hear it in one line, which we'll talk about later, and listening to interviews with the creators, Lana, we hear that basically this is what it's about. Like, the whole connection is about this. So. Right,
and to me, this is one of those things they just slipped in a scene. To me, it wasn't pushed. I mean, that was, I've had conversations like this with my friends and people I party with or whatever, and it did seem so natural. So anyway, for those people out there that think it was forced, I just think that it was naturally slipped in. And if you didn't go, what's limbic resonance, you would have just kept watching the show and maybe not look it up. So we'll talk about it.
Well, I didn't look it up until we started the podcast, and I thought, oh, I should pay attention to each title. There's probably meaning here. And I looked it up, and I'm like, mind-blowing.
Right. And when I first listened to it or watched it, I actually skipped over that completely and went to the next conversation, which we'll talk about as well.
Right. Cool. Okay, so here you go. Limbic resonance, and this is pulled from the wiki definition. Limbic resonance is the idea that the capacity for sharing deep emotional states arises from the limbic system of the brain. These states include the dopamine circuit promoting feelings of empathic harmony, and the norepinephrine circuit originated emotional states of fear, anxiety, and anger. The concept was advanced in the book A General Theory of Love, 2000, and is one of the 3 interrelated concepts central to the book's premise, that our brain chemistry and nervous systems are measurably affected by those closest to us, that our systems synchronize with one another in a way that has a profound implication for personality, lifelong emotional health. In other words, it refers to the capacity for empathy and nonverbal connection that is present in mammals. And this forms the basis for our social connections, as well as the foundation for various modes of therapy and healing. So this is really interesting to me because this is my life. Like, this has been my life work. I started out as a clinical therapist with a master's degree in social work. I was doing child and family therapy. And so then when I moved into working in the spiritual realm with energy healing and messages, things like that, emotions has been the focus, really, probably of my whole life. And a friend of mine, Daphne Rose Kingma, who is an author in this field as well, she once said, we were doing another podcast, and I don't even know if she remembers saying this line, but I've held on to it. But she said in that conversation that emotions are the glue that hold spirit, or that bind or bring spirit and physicality together. And to me, that's so true.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this show is. And as we dive into it, we all get connections, and that is emotion is what brings us together.
Yeah, the way that was introduced to me was feelings are the language of the soul.
Right.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And so let's take a step back here and maybe make this concept a little bit simpler. I'm going to reframe this. So the limbic system, it's a bunch of nerves in the brain, and then we have resonance. So basically we have one or more entity, which would be a mammal according to this, where that system starts to sync up with another brain's system. And they create this resonance, which creates a connection that we call empathy. So we can really connect with somebody on a spiritual, those are my words, spiritual and chemical or emotional level as well. So all those components are in there, and then we understand each other at another level because of the brain and how they sync up. And this, to me, shows up with animals. Even a lot of people are very sensitive to animals, and I would go as far as to say that, and we'll get into this, that it goes beyond the people you're closest to, right?
Oh yeah. And I want to say it, but we'll get, it also depends on how open you are, but I've had some pretty deep interactions with trees too. You know?
Right.
And the sun and the moon. So I think when we open ourselves up, that energy is everywhere and we can tap into it. But emotions for humans, emotions are what make humans and animals so unique in the
emotions are very powerful.
Yeah, and very physical.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't
very
think
visceral.
When we work with non-physical beings, they don't tend to be as emotional unless they join up with the body. You know, so like when I have done channeling, I've had them get really emotional inside of me, but it's that physical body, the humanness, that allows that venue.
It's very important, our human body, right? Yeah. It allows us this contextual experience for emotion and physicality. Super important.
This is what we came here
for.
This is the whole world, Earth experience is about emotions. And so I think, again, that's where I'm so in love with this show, because they do understand and focus on the emotional aspect of it. I don't know, I was thinking also infatuation, you know, because people say, oh, you can't fall in love instantly, but that chemical reaction can happen with someone instantly, and sometimes we say, oh, it's just sexual, but that would be the same thing. That's the emotions lining up, and it may last long term or short term, but you see that happening. And then all those women out there, or men who are hanging out with women, you know that if a group of women are living together, that their cycles get on the same path, and you end up
with the alpha uterus.
Right? Who has the alpha uterus? So, you know, we are definitely seeing evidence of that in just everyday things, for sure.
So, should we dig in to the episode?
Yes, let's go deep into the episode.
All right, so we're going to tackle this a little bit. We're going to talk about limbic resonance a little bit more to start out with. I know it's not in, and then we'll get along to a conversation, and then we'll jump into the first scene, actually. So we're gonna skip around a little bit. Limbic resonance. Nick's in the show, he says it's a language older than our species, and that's it. That's how they introduce limbic resonance. It's just a quick one-liner.
And that, I mean, gosh, we could go on and on about that. Older than our species. So what species was it? Or is it beyond Earth? Is it something we brought to Earth when we created the species? You know, that's a black hole.
Right. Well,
into the Matrix.
The theory is that it's in all mammals too. So were there mammals before humans?
Right, so,
you know, that kind of thing.
Right.
And they do, and they talk about a different species, right? That's the idea. And
right.
That's
right. It being kind of a different. Yeah.
Yeah. So in this scene, we got Riley, Nix, and her buddies just chilling out and talking. And we have one of the gentlemen there. I don't know their names. They're kind of not important characters. Yeah. But he's talking about this experience he had with his nieces, and I don't know if it was his sister or somebody, but they had an accident, and the nieces and him, they knew, but they didn't know what was going on. They felt compassion or whatever it would be for this person, and they did it together. So there's more than, even there, they introduced the idea that more than one person can feel for another person. Mm-hmm. So it's plural. So I imagine there was 3 people cuddled up together, feeling this compassion or knowing that this person's bleeding. And so that was pretty interesting. And that's just really quick.
Right. You know, I had a situation similar to that years ago. And we'll get into in a little bit when we talk about clusters, but my friend Daryl, who lived in England and I live here in New York, and she was definitely like my first member of the cluster. But she died, and I saw it here. There was a symbol that I knew about, that when she died, she would be walking the hills of Scotland. Oh man, I'm going to cry just talking about this. We haven't even gotten in, and this was just a little aside, but I saw her and her brother, who had died earlier, and that was it. She was going to meet up with her brother, and I was laying on my couch, and I saw her on the hills of Scotland, and it was like an hour or so later that I think someone from my family came to the door because her mom didn't want me to be alone when I heard. So they called my family first to come tell me. And I was like, but I know, because I just saw her. Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, what a powerful experience.
So yeah. So I can, and they just throw that in. Like, that's the thing about this. There's so many, I think that's why we all resonate with it so much, because we've had little experiences, and they just throw these one-liners in, and it's like, what? I have a whole story about it.
Right. And that's perfect. That's why there's a huge fan base. That's why this is a magical show. And this was all presented in dialogue. Yeah. Again, I'm going back to the magic of dialogue with this show.
Yeah, so keep going on.
All right. So next, he throws in that line about, oh, yeah, it's limbic resonance. It's a language older than our species. And then they go on a little bit, and the other guy who's not important, he's like, they start talking about, right, this is where the drugs start to come into the show, and he says, you're talking about DMT. And Nix goes on to say, It's a simple molecule present in all living things. Scientists talk about it being part of an eco-biological synaptic network. When people take DMT, they see their birth, their death, worlds beyond this one. You're talking truth, connection, transcendence. And they just kind of slip that in as right after Limbic Resonance, and they just go on about the show. So to me, this was, when I was first watching the show, this is one of those things I'm like, whoa, that was the first kind of, did they just put that in there kind of thing? Because DMT and drugs and all these kind of things, they get to talk about what's taboo in society, right? Because we're talking about sexuality. Drugs are an underground thing. They're more popularized now with like trips to Peru to go have ayahuasca and all these things, but they've, for the most part, always been, in my experience, it's you don't go there kind of thing. It's always underground. It's for bad people. It's for criminals. It's for all these kind of things. In the culture that I was brought up in.
Right. Well, not always, because in traditional, there's definitely traditional indigenous culture.
We're talking indigenous, not.
Well, I know, but
they didn't. They,
at one point.
with the culture I grew up in,
yeah,
you know, going to school with your DARE program, don't do drugs. Drugs are bad. The only way you take them is prescribed by a doctor. You know, there's so many laws against such great medicines, in my opinion, that we don't understand. So that's what I'm getting at. Is It's very, even in the scene, we're taking Riley, who's a DJ who does raves. Raves are notorious for drugs and candy kids and just so many different things. And they had to put it in that scene instead of a different scene, right? So they're kind of just, in my opinion, they're introducing it in a way that is acceptable, because if you look at the dudes around them, they're not good dudes, right? And they all end up dead because they all want the drugs to sell them and make money or whatever in just a couple scenes. So anyway, so DMT, and what was important in this particular scene for me is they talk to you about DMT, but really we're talking about concepts. They're introducing the concept of everything is connected and everything is one. And that, so this was kind of a really big deal for me. It's one of the things that I picked up out of the episode that was just like, whoa, very awesome. I'm intrigued about this, because where are they going to take this? So
yeah, and for me, I mean, I know DMT, but I know people associate that with a drug, but for me, I've always heard it as it's in everything, and I know I'm connected to everything, and I can link in through emotions and energy to everything. So for me, DMT, even though I know culturally it's often associated with a drug, someone that either, you know, I don't know if it's synthetic or if it's extracted or how it gets put into the body, but something outside of us that we have to put in. A lot of people think of it that way. But to me, I'm like, no, this is how I see it. It's in everything. It's in me. I just have to link into everything, and then it amplifies it for me. So I hear it differently, but a lot of times people do associate it with drugs. And in this scene, it is associated with drugs.
Right. Well, to my knowledge, so as far as public information about drugs, especially hallucinogens, thank you. It wasn't until DMT, the spirit molecule, which you can find on Netflix, was in 2012. And this gentleman took it upon himself to do some experimentation with DMT and start to study it, because we're starting, as a society, as a whole, we're really starting to study hallucinogens as therapeutical medicines now. Indigenous people know about these things. They've been using them for thousands of years, but that's an old society without the laws that we have, and they understand things that here in America, in our culture, we have laws against, and we just have connotations and things that we're just really ignorant about the subject because it's illegal and things like that. But anyway, it wasn't until that movie comes out where he talks about, well, he thinks like none of this is set in stone, but the idea is DMT is in everything, especially the plant life. And that's how you mentioned earlier that you've had those experiences with trees and plants and the sun and things like that. So if this is a molecule that resonates within everything and you can tap into that naturally, then you can have those experiences. So, but it wasn't, and it's not until in modern times anyway that we're really starting to scientifically, with scientists in a lab doing research and studies and stuff, really starting to understand what these can do for us, in my opinion.
Nothing's real until it's scientific.
Right.
I'm not against
Womp,
science
womp,
at
womp.
all because my son is an amazing scientist and I'm happy that he's a part of that world. But yeah, that's interesting. Well, it's interesting the use of drugs in this. Well, even just I was just taking a moment to think, I mean, we said we don't promise no spoilers, but we're kind of trying to stick to the episode.
Oh, we said we were going to spoil.
Yeah, we're going to spoil. I said we didn't, I did a double negative. But anyway, even in this, and we're getting into the first scene too, but drugs are used in two ways here. And right in the first episode, they show both sides of drugs because... So you, and I don't know if you want to share anything about, you did go to Peru and have experience with ayahuasca.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an opening experience for you. And for me, drugs, even just painkillers, when I have surgery, like I had surgery a few times that I've needed, well, surgeries. When I've had surgeries. So for me, drugs are not cool. They shut down my systems like crazy, so I could really relate, like in the first scene, and as it goes on, we know Will uses it, but they use drugs to shut this connection down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of people in society do use drugs to numb, like when you're dealing with people who are in recovery from addictions, often they are some of the most empathic people, and they were so sensitive to the world around them, and if it's not a comfortable world, then they use substances to numb themselves. So they really show both sides of the drugs, and that's not even talking about not the over-the-counter drugs or the prescription drugs, because right now a lot of our society is numbing itself with prescription drugs to make it legit,
right? The legal drug pushers.
And that's even right. Like that's what I'm talking about with, and you were there when I had my knee surgery, and I was in so much pain. Even like if I get work done on my teeth, I choose not to have Novocaine because the Novocaine is worse on me than the pain of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But with my knee surgery, and I couldn't get upstairs, so I asked you to I didn't let you throw them out yet, but like a couple days into it, I was such a mess from not having my connection that I'm used to, that I asked you to take the pills upstairs where I wasn't even overusing them. I was using them less than they said, but I couldn't handle the being shut down. So, I don't know, I think that's really cool that they show both sides of the drugs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and that's what I mentioned about our ignorance around drugs and medicine, and plant medicine in particular versus chemical medicine. I'm not saying that those don't have their place and they're not helpful, and it's just really about finding the proper use for the medicine. Mm-hmm. And that's where I don't believe where we have the wisdom in our mainstream culture to understand these things, because we do have certain connotations around what drugs mean. If it's just society says, American society says you can't have these things, and that's bad, and you're going to go to jail and all this kind of stuff. And that's been the opposite understanding of my past. So when I was roughly 20, I believe is actually when I started using drugs for the exact same reason you just talked about, being very sensitive. And I didn't have anybody to show me what empathy was or intuition or anything. You just know things, and the world around you can be very painful, and mine was. And so eventually I was also brought up very hardcore Christian, like Southern Baptist very strict, read and memorize your Bible verses or you're going to get the belt kind of thing. And when I was 17, I took my first drink of alcohol. And it was a big deal because you're not supposed to drink. You're not supposed to have sex before marriage, all this kind of stuff. And I took this drink and I had a blast. And I'm not condoning alcohol. Actually, I think it's one of the worst things on the planet for us. But at that moment, I was just like, wow, what is the big deal? Why is this such a stigma on? And then it was sex came next, and I wasn't married. And I was like, what is wrong with people? Like, what is the story that I'm being told? Like, there's this other world of awesomeness that's not filled with, it's just being natural. And eventually I had to get rid of the guilt of all those things. And that did happen. But in those moments, it was just this awakening, like, man, whatever society is telling me is not accurate in my society, right? The people I grew up around with and the religion and my perception of all of those things. So that was an easy gateway for me to say yes to other drugs and harder drugs. And so when I took my first hallucinogens when I was 21, I believe that was the first time I had mushrooms. So I've had LSD, I've had mushrooms, I've had DMT as in ayahuasca, not the chemical stuff. So I've been introduced to a lot of drugs, ecstasy and all these things, but it wasn't until much later in my life, up into my 30s, where I really started to understand, like I said, the magic and the purpose of these things. So you start to take them to numb yourself and party and have a good time. But then I started to realize the healing properties of these things. Like ecstasy, for example, was legal up until the 80s, and they used it for therapy in regulated situations where you had a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I forgot which one deals out drugs. Yeah, so they could do that, and they could use it for therapy, and there's actually talk of bringing that back. But to me, that particular substance really opens up your heart center, and it lets you be true to your, like, it's like a truth serum. It's really crazy. They call it ecstasy for a reason, but it is very therapeutical. And so there's a lot of people that could use that. But then when you go back later and you take these substances after you've done your healing work, of course, it's not going to work the same as the first time you took it. But then I started to experience that I myself, my physical being, was not in so much trauma, that the drug itself didn't have the effects that it did. I didn't need it anymore to keep my heart open and to love people and be truthful and authentic to myself. But telling a 17, people don't know about these things. There's not this wisdom unless you have somebody in your life telling you and guiding you along the path of even not using drugs, maybe, right? Having a Sheila in your life to teach you about emotions and empathy and intuition and visions and all this stuff instead of keeping it hidden.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And when we go back to the scene with Nix and Riley, and then the next scene, it really kind of shows that difference. So when she ends up using the drugs, she does have a positive experience, but it gets broken up by a really violent experience. Mm-hmm. And so the underground energy of it and the unsafety of these drugs is also the use that's happening now, because they're being used in unsafe situations a lot of times, which then...
Right. Everybody reacts differently to all sorts of drugs, so you never know what's going to happen. So if you're listening, I'm not telling you to go out and do anything.
Right. I mean, well, and I've been the other side of it just wasn't a good idea. Like, I just knew. But you also mentioned you noticed after it that you didn't need it anymore. Like it did its job. And I think that's the other thing. It's a gateway drug. Like, I think that these can, when used in the right way, can be gateways, which we're going to talk about a little later too. A lot of times people get stuck in the gateway, and then that doesn't help you. So if you just keep going back for that same moment and not realizing that just opened up your system, and then you carry it further in other ways.
Right. Yeah.
So cool. All right. So that's that's all about the limbic resonance and the scene where they bring it out, even though limbic resonance, I think, really covers everything that happens in Sense8.
Right. I think the idea of limbic resonance is a scientific explanation, or one of them, for oneness. Right. Our brain really can't distinguish itself between another person. The brain, physical brain, not the personality and all of that kind of stuff. There's recently been a video rolling around, and it talks about how we just kind of hallucinate all the time. Our brain is literally hallucinating all the time, and they've done experiments where they put a fake hand where your hand should be, and they put a board in front of you, and they actually will hit the fake hand, and your brain doesn't know the difference, and you react and pull your hand away, even though you physically know that's not your hand. So, I mean, there's just a bunch of experiments going around, and that's the thing with science. I love science too, but there's something that's been around a lot longer than our current science that a lot of masters and teachers have been talking about for the longest time, but yet it's important for some people's minds to, oh, this is science, it's solid. But the thing with science is we always will find a new device to discover more of life that's already been there.
Right. Well, a true scientist does have to look beyond what's here in order to discover more. So it's really the same energy, but and I think a really good scientist will use both sides, both hemispheres of the brain, the logic and the emotional, the intuitive, in order to get new information. But I think our society definitely likes that logic and needs that to anchor in some truths. That's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. So let's keep going.
To the first scene. Yeah. Oh, man. I am really excited to talk about this first scene. It is the most frustrating thing, I think, to me, in the entire series so far, aside from Netflix saying there's no more Sense8.
So they think.
Yeah, so they think. So in the first scene, we have a woman. Like, if you're... Oh, first, before we even go a little bit further, let's reiterate that it was a creative choice by the writers to show the audience only the information that the characters had at the time when they recorded those scenes. So that's really important to know as you're going in, because there's a lot of confusion in the very first. I mean, there's confusion, but...
And there's a lot of confusion in the first three, and we get taken on the same journey, and it's not necessarily fun.
Right.
So that's, I think, why we have to keep telling people, watch the first three. But it's the same as in real life. Like, when people come to work with me and they're just starting to open up, it's like, let's keep going. You're at the hardest part, really. And it all gets... Or even like when I do the Consciously Awesome program, and people get stuck, it's like, you got to keep going.
Right.
The chaos ends when you get more information. So I like that they did it, but I see how that creative choice could have made it harder for people to engage in the beginning, because we don't want that discomfort sometimes. But
right, but then again, we did talk about how hard it is to write multi-dimensional media, so it's crazy. Yeah, it is.
And in actually having the impact, it's an amazing choice. It's an awesome choice. It's what makes it stand out. And thank God they don't always, we're just never going to get anywhere if artists are always just doing
the same thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like the scientist. You got to keep going.
So we got this woman, Angela. She's chilling out on this bed in this broken down building. She's clearly, she's either got some type of fever, she's got the dengue fever or something, she's sweating, or she's doing some drugs. We do find out she's doing some drugs, but at first you're just like, this is a really creepy scene. Right? It's that whole like dirty drugs kind of thing. She's all strung out on a dirty mattress in a broken building, and then all of a sudden...
Broken church. That is really symbolic. I'm just saying.
Right.
Like, I overlooked that, too, in the beginning.
I did, too, until you just brought it up.
I don't think there's any chance that was a mistake.
Right.
Or a coincidence. Like, it had to be a church.
So much has been consciously placed in this show. That's so cool. So she's having a rough time. You can tell she's in pain, so she's gonna go to those drugs, and we don't really get to know all of those drugs that were in there until later in the season. But we have this guy just show up out of nowhere, and he starts talking to her, and they start talking about having kids or birthing. So you're like, what's going on? It's so frustrating, the scene. And then you have another guy show up in her other ear, and they're contradicting each other and playing it, Whispers, as we find out, is playing against Jonas. And Jonas and Angela they have a relationship of some sort. So this is right, they do. And the clock's ticking. Guys roll up into the broken church to grab Angela. And it was so frustrating to watch the scene the first time. You're just like, oh, like I had questions, but it was just so dirty that I didn't want to continue watching to find the answers. Like, it wasn't that intriguing to me because of the scene. But then, so I've only watched it once all the way through. I'm going back the second time for the podcast and really digging into this. But the dialogue that we have going on is we talk about multidimensionality, and they set up the story arc so perfectly in the scene, but you don't know that until you know the story arc. And that's what's so frustrating about it to me, going through that.
And then what makes it so brilliant when you...
Exactly, it is.
Oh my gosh.
It's
So
like, whoa.
This is definitely not just for people. This is for people, I think, what it's sparking. But I think that as humans, we're evolving to this point of wanting more.
Mm-hmm.
We've been dumbed down in so many areas of life. Like, entertainment has dumbed down, not all of it, but I mean, I think that we're craving
sustenance.
Yeah. And so, but you don't really know when you watch the first scene, is this just another, bullshit type of
right.
show, except luckily the Wachowskis have a reputation that makes people like us keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got to be something more, And if we keep spreading the word, get past episode 3, and you're gonna love those later,
Right, the characters really start to grow on you for sure.
Yeah.
And to me, that's important. Character development is super important.
And even for me, well, I want to just point out, because we're going to talk about this in speculations, because is Jonah a good guy? Is Angelica a good guy? Is she on the good side? Well, we know from the dialogue she's on both sides. So we've got this whole, they actually have a scene where Jonas is, the way it's filmed, Jonas is on her one shoulder and Whispers is on the other shoulder. Well, in the Christians' lore, right? Not the Bible but you've always got those images, and it's gone in film too. You've got the angel on one side and the devil on the other. I'm pretty sure that the angel's usually on the left side, which is where Jonas is, and the devil. I don't know if they thought that through, but that scene was the angel and the devil whispering in your ear at the same time, which is a very common
theme,
mythology in our culture.
Duality.
And then you've got the duality, you've got So interesting for me, in my energetic work, I've had people on my healing table, I've had people go through the birthing process and birth themselves. Not even that I'm facilitating, it spontaneously happens for them. More than one time I've seen people do that. So I actually, when I was watching it and she was giving birth, but she wasn't pregnant, I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen this. Which I don't think that many people have. But we give birth to ourselves or energetically often. And people who surrender into it like she did.
Yeah, he shows up and then they're talking about giving whoever these things are or beings at the time a chance, right? Without being born, they'd have no chance of defending themselves, basically. And so Angela goes through this painful birthing process after, I believe she hooks herself up with some more drugs. Or she was going to. Yeah, she was going to, and then she reaches her hand out and he shows up. Jonas is there. And he comforts her and he walks her through that, and then you start to see the main characters, and she just shows up in their lives, just kind of in rags, and they're all freaking out, like, what's going on? Why am I seeing this woman? And
yeah, she's in the white. She's got the long blonde hair.
Right.
So there's sort of like this stereotypical angel look to her.
Except for
but
she
we're-
looks, she's strung out on heroin. She's all sweaty and gross looking.
But I think that each of the characters then interpret her differently based on their perception. We actually don't, we're going to get into each of the characters because that's what else is happening in this episode. We get introduced to them next, but we don't actually see Leto see her. It's just referenced later that he did, which is interesting because most of them we see her show up. I mean,
So Leto's walking through the church. So we don't know these characters yet. So you have this guy with a gun, this hot looking Spanish dude or Mexican dude is walking through this church. You don't know who he is yet, so you don't know that he's acting, right? So that was pretty cool. It's like, oh man, this is gonna get intense. And then she shows up right in front of him before he sees the priest.
Oh, does she?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm pretty sure that's how that goes.
Okay, I know at one point.
But he just keeps going.
Okay. At one point, he references you were having visions of angels yesterday or something like that. So I thought it.
Yeah, I think that's two different scenes because they plop her down in front of everybody.
Yeah.
In there, but before we move on to that, I do want to talk about what I think is like really important. And so we have this. They set up the entire story arc that they have not finished yet, just in this first scene, and it has to do with the story between Angela, Jonas, and Whispers, and whoever else there might be. And what was obviously, so Whispers, she tells Jonah she loves him. And Whispers is like, nah, you don't. You haven't told him yet? So here's my question about that.
Right. Does he know you're lying?
Right, but wouldn't he? I mean, that's just kind of a critique. If they're all Sense8s, if you will, they all know each other's energy and can feel each other's thoughts, how can you hide something from somebody? Because she can get away with lying to one of them and not the other in that scenario. So that was just a question I had. How does that work?
So she can get away with lying to one of them. So I think she's lying to Whispers. We don't know who Whispers is and what that is. But I think that there's levels of connection within. And so Jonas and Angelica would be that deeper level of connection. But I don't know. I mean, we can do some speculation here if you want. When I first watched it, I'm not saying I totally trust Jonas and Angelica now, because I think...
Well, they were up to no good, whether they changed their ways or not. One way or another, they didn't start out right, in my opinion.
Right, and I think that my worldview is we're evolving as a human species, or if we want to say multiple species. So I could see that, in this idea of a cluster, that the cluster before would struggle more, and then this struggle would take it a little bit further. And she's obviously trying to help the Sense8s, and so is Jonas. I mean, she says help them.
And that's what I wanted to talk about. She says protect them, and he doesn't answer.
Oh, doesn't
he? He doesn't. He doesn't say he'll do it. He just says, the only thing that he does say is, like, you'll always be in my heart. And then Whisper shows up, and she's like, protect them. But he doesn't say that he was. And that's why I don't trust Jonas a lot. He's set up to be a good guy. Maybe.
Sort of.
Right?
To me, when I first watched it, I didn't think he was set up necessarily to be a good guy. I thought we were supposed to be suspicious, just like the Sense8 should be suspicious.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's still in the gray area because, that's we won't get too far into the series, but...
Right, and I'm not going to be totally surprised if they have him... See, I think this goes down to, is there really good guys and bad guys? And I think that I feel like, because I'm so close with the Wachowskis.
So close.
I feel like they're going to show layers. And I think that there is no good and bad. And I think so when we get backstories, it's grayer, right? It's usually grayer. And I think there's grayness around Jonas and Angelica and Whispers. And maybe people do things most of the time with good intentions, and they can go really awry.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, that's.
And then when you get into survival mode, you start behaving just to survive. It's hard to do much more than that. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think it could really go in a lot of different directions there.
So we have this
but Jonas has some pretty amazing lines throughout the series.
Yeah, a lot of them do though, right? Like it's good. It is good to show the life's not black and white.
Right.
You know, it's gray, and everybody's just doing what they need to do to make it.
Right.
Until they die, because we're all gonna die.
And then you got the whole suicide in there. That's pretty interesting. I mean, we could talk forever, but.
Mm-hmm. So we got Angela. She just gave birth, whatever that means, to our cast of characters that we're going to follow. We have Jonah, who leaves because Whispers shows up, and Angela's going to kill herself, and she does. And then we have Whispers, who seems like the crazy bad guy who was scheming and plotting. Right, exactly. And then we get to go meet the characters.
So, I mean, in this, I think we don't get much of the characters, but you want to just, for the sake of saying it, bringing them into our energy field, talk about each one a little bit. We just talked about Lito. He's in Mexico City, and he enters in a church, but we don't know he's an actor.
We don't.
So
we get to know. We do get to know in that episode later on, because they go into the trailer and stuff, and they take the. He's messing up his lines. So, but the first scene was pretty cool. Just like, what's going on with this guy? It's so intense.
Yeah. And so actually, let's talk a little bit, as we go through each character, let's talk a little bit about the gateway to what allows them to see Angelica, or so they start to open up, and they actually represent different gateways. So with Lito, it's his creative art, right? He is in the arts. He's an actor. We don't know that yet, but he's in creative mode, acting, and it's that creativity, the art, that opens him up to that acts as the gateway to the vision.
And creative energy is crazy important to being a human being, in my opinion. Yeah.
It's creation energy,
right?
In human form. So, yeah. And then we have Riley Blue.
And I would have to say, so she's an Icelandic DJ. And I would have to say that her gateway is kind of drugs.
But
Ish.
She may have been on drugs that night. We don't know before she takes it later. She definitely uses drugs for it. And she references drugs. Oh, because they reference her having she's seen it actually when she's just sitting there by vaping, I think. Or smoking something. So probably, yeah. But we also have the music in there, because she starts to see things in the rave while she's doing her music. So you got a little bit of both going on.
And she does connect with Nomi and Nita when they take Brownie that's in pot. She gets pulled into their scene that way. And then later you see her connect with Will very deeply when she has DMT.
Right. So, I mean, definitely that's kind of her thing. Too, but I think there's also the creativity with her.
And then we got Sun Bak from Korea, who's a high-level business woman in Seoul. And with her, when she first sees Angela, she is practicing. Angelica. She is practicing Akata or doing Tai Chi.
Tai Chi is.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, you don't really know, but that's what.
Right. Yeah.
That's what the descriptions say.
Sure.
IMDb. So, but yeah, so there's that kind of martial arts movement meditation gateway. We also see emotion with her. That's a little bit later, but anger. You see her fist go, and that's when she first opens up to the cluster a little bit. And then her emotion and anger about what's going on in the work. You see the chicken come in, so. Both of those for her too, and I think that's true. Like, I think people use more than one gateway to experience this.
Oh, sure, yeah.
All the different ways that we do. Wolfgang. the German locksmith.
Just dancing in the club.
He's in the club too with the music.
Yeah.
So is that his first scene? I'm not remembering exactly.
Yeah, it's real quick. It's just when they first show Angela seeing him.
Angelica.
Sorry, Angelica.
So his is just music as far as we know at that point.
Right.
Will, he's the American police officer.
Yeah, and gets a little deep here. And he has a dream.
Yeah.
But, and it's him as a little boy following a little girl, which we'll learn about later. Yeah, asking for help, and she points him to that.
Right.
So a dream or a vision.
With the dream or vision, but he wakes up.
He does.
And he's hearing Riley's music.
Or Wolfgang's or Riley's, one of the two.
Oh right. Well, I think they flash to Riley, and then they end up deeply.
Right. I love that scene where he's just so pissed off at the neighbors and they're not there.
They don't exist.
It's like he's tripping or something. It was hilarious to me.
Yeah, but dreams are definitely the way people.
Mm-hmm.
So we add in that gateway that people open up during dreams, and Kala, she's the Indian pharmacist in Mumbai.
And she's just walking down the stairs, and she sees Angelica.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we don't really know what her gateway is. I don't.
Maybe she doesn't have one. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because like we kind of talked about, we don't remember our first waking up.
Right. Maybe that she's the character that just doesn't have one.
Right.
Because she feels the rain. And it's not raining outside, but she's just going to work. Like there was no indication that maybe stress for her. I don't know.
I don't think so. I think she just is.
Yeah.
But then we have that whole idea. I mean, she's going to the temple, talking to Ganesh. So she's got a spiritual connection of her own in those traditions that are in their truest way, or what we think of as they open you up. And they do. I'm not saying they don't, but I think she has a traditional, so she's kind of tied to a traditional system of opening up to spirit, where it's normal a little bit, sort of, even though she thinks it's weird, you know. And then Capheus, the Kenyan bus driver.
And we don't see a lot of him. He just is driving the bus and sees her. And I don't recall. And then we have the scene with his mom.
Well, I think he's probably emotional too. This is Limbic Resonance, so they're mostly all reacting from emotions in their life. But also, the very first scene when they see Angelica, that's not even put on necessarily by their gateways. A little bit like opens it up for them, but that's also Angelica reaching out to them
right.
And that whole explosion of energy that's beyond us, you know. So sometimes I think it comes in from not us, and then we start to see some of the gateways. That's interesting.
And then we got Nomi, American hacker and political blogger. And yeah, go ahead.
Where does Nomi first?
Well, just really quick, she's in her room.
Oh, her very first thing.
And she's just doing her hormone injections for the week or whatever, right. And she sees her in the mirror or something.
Yeah, she does. Mirrors, and interesting, like from old school witch and different kind of sorcery type things.
Right.
Mirrors are often used too. She sees her in the mirror. I mean, we don't know if they just had sex, but Neitz is in the tub and
right.
She's giving herself the hormones or whatever. They're together, so that could be the sex as a gateway too. But, yeah. So, and then they have to go through now we're on that journey that is uncomfortable for the viewer as well, because now they all have to deal with these visions that are happening. And so the next couple episodes, well, really all of it, but we have that discomfort of dealing with that comes up.
Right. And well, and as a watcher too, you just got introduced to 8 different story arcs plus the master story arc from the first scene, and you don't really know that yet. You know what I mean? Like they
Right, so you're
all
all
have.
confused. And that's reminding me. So because I am really sensitive to energies, I have this experience, a similar experience to this, every time I go into a new social media. So the first time way back at MySpace, when I opened up to that, and suddenly my world opened up to all these beings' energy. It took me days to settle. Like my brain was just, I didn't realize what it was because I hadn't really done that before. But just opening up to all those energies of people around the world. And because I am so telepathic, I was getting, and empathic, I was getting all these feelings and emotions. It happened again when I transferred over to Facebook. And it took me a few days before I'm like, oh, right, this is what it is, you know. And at Facebook, I was opening them up to people from my whole life, you know, my childhood, and then people that I didn't know. And by the time I moved over to Twitter, I kind of knew. Okay, just, you know, every time you open a new account, you open to a big group of people, just chill. But they're kind of doing that same, having that same experience here. And so are we, because it's like, you start getting everybody's feelings, everybody's cravings, all these different
and you don't know who's who, and you think it's yours. Like you think this is your stuff you're dealing with because you don't know any better. There's nobody there to tell you. You know, you can't talk to anybody about it. It's like, oh no. So you kind of got to bump around in the dark.
Right. And so I like, again, now that I know, I think that these episodes are brilliant because we get to be right in there. And I think that's partly why we all feel so deeply connected and why we feel like we're going on this journey with them, why it's blurring over from television into real life as far as the fan base, the connections, and I mean...
Because they did a really great job giving us a reflection of an experience that we already know.
Right. Right. And then they keep walking us through it a little bit more. And so people that maybe have gotten stuck in there start to breathe and be like, oh, okay, there's a pathway out. So they do an incredibly brilliant, you know, I've been trying to help people through that pathway. And then they come up and they do a show that just naturally helps people without even telling them that that's what they're going to do, which is just brilliant.
It is. Now we've been introduced to the cluster. Let's talk about a cluster a little bit.
Yeah. What is a cluster?
What is a cluster?
So in the show, we start to learn, and I don't think we know this in episode 1, but we start to learn, they say it's a different species.
Eventually.
Right, eventually. But I'm just saying we're going to talk about cluster now. So we're not exactly, we're going to kind of draw on what we know about the show. They were all born on the same day physically in their original birth, and then another Sense8 births them in, and that awakens them and ignites them in a way. So they kind of do set it as a different type of a evolution than what we think of as humans often. But I don't know. I can see it in lots of different ways, and I can interpret that in lots of different ways. I do. So in my metaphysical training, there's the one, originally the old school teaching of it was the 7th root race. I've heard star children. There are beings that haven't been cycling on Earth in the same soul evolution that start to come in. So I get it from that perspective. And then there's also souls that have been coming to Earth that I think are evolving to this. So, you know, we've talked about, and I bet you out, you know, all of you listening too, you can understand this, like, it's really hard to bring in these concepts. And we can understand concepts beyond our mind in a way, but as soon as we try to relate them to each other through art or through conversation, we need structure, because that's what humans do. We create structure. So having said that, in the show, they create a structure around what a cluster is to give us a framework, an understanding, a lore that we can move along the story with. And I get that. I see it a little different. Well, I mean, I've been given kind of that lore in my own words, which I'll talk about in a second. But so I don't really think that clusters have to do with your age being exactly the same or when you were born on that same day. I think that's a good way to show us that there's a connection right from birth, even if you don't remember it till later. And that the connection kind of happens before you come in a sense. And it gives us just a structure to frame a story around.
Right. We need
and then
context.
The boundaries, like, okay, so in this group, Sense8s can do this, and it only happens in that group. And then other Sense8s without your cluster can do different things. So that you need those types of things to set a story and a plot and all of those. And as humans, we rely on those types of things, but really we have to get beyond them or we end up limiting. So if we stick to just that part of the story, I don't think we're honoring the writer's intention of telling us this. I don't think they believe that it's limited to those things. I think that that's the structure that they put around it, in my opinion. But it's the remembering that you're...
Right, we got to tell a story, we need structure, and sometimes we need training wheels. And I think that's really what those were, because later into the show, they start to break out of that in a really awesome way. Even in the beginning, so Whispers can see into any pod when he sees you and you look back, right? So that's this idea that you can be connected outside of your pod. So, but we need to have this core group, and I think those are just kind of the training wheels that we can take off. But more importantly, the reason we're talking about this is how can we live a Sense8 life, right? How can we be sensitive as a real life person? What's our perspective about how we can relate with other people? Do we have a pod? Can we relate to most people like this, or is it just other sensitive people like us? Do you know what I mean? Do we have anybody in our life? Does this extend out to, I don't know, everything in creation, including animals? Like empathy, right? It doesn't know the difference between who's who. It's just a resonance, this field of energy that syncs up.
There you go, right, the resonance. We have frequencies that we are by nature or by existence that we resonate more closely with. And those resonance maybe spark that deeper ability to have the empathic connection and do these things. So for me, my lore that I was shown, and the way I've kind of taught it, it's like we all believe in, well, I don't know if everyone believes in oneness, but between science and spirituality, we've kind of come to a conclusion that we're all one energy. And then how are we these individual beings and also one energy? And how do we connect to each other? So for me, it's not separating. We're not separated from source because we are source. So I was shown like cell division. Okay, so when we're creating human, because everything's replicated in the physical, so when we're creating human birth, we start with a single cell and that divides into two cells, but we have two complete cells. We don't have less than, we actually replicate. So one cell divides and then there's two whole beings in those cells, and then those divide and then those divide. And so that's how I was shown our souls come to human form. So while we may be a cell of human existence, we're still all of existence in that cell. So for me, it was interesting because they chose the 8, and then within the 8, we start to see some more closeness developing in some of them. So I was shown that our sort of soul family, or our most connected, are those last cells of oneness that we divided from when we became our individual cells. So the last one would be like, for me, it was the twin flame, but there's like a really deep resonance with that last division. Or maybe when you're going back, I guess I don't know how it works. But then there's 4 before that, right? Like there's 4 cells that when those divide, it goes into 4 cells. So it's kind of going backwards, I guess. But, and then there's the closeness to that. And then the next 4 would make that 8. And that would be like the cluster. So I've actually had a similar understanding of that, but not not as, like you just mentioned, a pod. Sometimes I call it a pod, soul family, that close resonance. And now going into what you said, I think that that resonance, when we come upon them, it acts as that gateway. It makes it easier for us to jump into those things. Like, we can actually do those things with everyone when we remember how, and we connect to our oneness, and we learn how to move along that whole spectrum. But when we get together with people that resonate with us like that, at that very similar frequency, it almost spontaneously happens. That's
right. It's like we're on the same wavelength, man.
Right.
You know, so it makes it easier. And then once you've experienced those wavelengths, if you will, and those experiences, then if you're so inclined, you can start to take the same energy patterns and use that with other people that don't resonate with you, if they're willing. You know, I mean, it is probably spontaneous, but people come and go out of your life that are way out. You know, you just get really buddy, or you know, this soulmate, and they come and go, and sometimes you don't have that experience right away with somebody, and you end up having a really deep relationship where you can connect like that with somebody. You know, so I think it's great because we have those people in our lives, and we have those training wheels, but just to take that and the next step further, instead of saying like, hey, this is just this one person that I can do this with, just understanding that, oh, this is just energy that I can produce and resonate at. And if other people resonate with the same energy, then we can have the same experience.
right, because ultimately we want to move beyond a cluster. We want humanity to reach this state. Like, that is the goal. Even in Sense8, that is, I think, the underlying goal. Right? If we reach this state of consciousness, the world will shift. So, but examples. Oh, I know what I wanted to say. So I'm pretty sure it was Lana in one of the interviews I was listening to. She mentions that the show's about the quantum nature of life cutting boundaries, and so I think that that's really important to remember, and to do justice to the show, we should remember that it's a quantum show. And as much as humans that we want to kind of hold on to pieces that we can grab from our physicality, we have to remember they're working really hard to say something quantum in a linear form. And that's like,
so if you're listening, that's your homework, to go study quantum physics.
Or to just understand that it's like beyond, you know, it's stacked.
Right. A good show is What the Bleep. It came out a long time ago. You could watch that. It's a good introductory show. There's been some discoveries since then, but it's a good starter show.
Yeah, I think quantum, I think it is important to realize that we're getting
understanding and entanglement and things.
I actually I haven't read it yet, but I'll look and I'll tell you in one of the other episodes. I got a book about that recently, and I don't remember the title or what it was, but I think it's supposed to be like, it's not Cliff Notes for it, but it's supposed to be like quantum physics for easy read or something like that. So when I'll tell you guys in the next couple episodes if I remember. But I want to talk about, have you had experiences with people that you felt that resonance really closely, and some of those things happen?
I can't really say. I've had some drug-induced experiences where I was able to have telepathic conversations, and those are amazing because you're talking in telepathy, and it works. Like, you're not saying anything, you're just having your experience, and somebody comes into your experience, and you just say to them, hey, we're going to have this conversation. Actually, one time, so I was with this, a really good friend of mine, and I was like, hey, we can do this. Like, he didn't know that it could happen. I told him, this is going to happen, and you just have to wait for it, and it will. And I was just doing my thing, chilling out, and he came into my room where I was, and it happened. We just sunk up, and I started talking to him. I wasn't saying any words, and I was just relating energy to him in words. And we just start busting up laughing because it's one of the most amazing experiences you could have. So that was one instance. And then another one, I was actually able to, we're kind of in like this cuddle puddle, but I was able to use my consciousness to move my friend's body and limbs. And he wasn't doing it, and I was. And we just busted up laughing because I kind of took over the energy in that space. But I really haven't had any, I've more of...
The person right before you came here, there's a woman you were really connected to. I thought you had some telepathic connection.
Yeah, there's been, I haven't, as far as like having conversations or anything, like there's been really intense experiences where that particular person you're talking about, I would look at her and I would see my soul inside of her. And it was like this really amazing reflection. So it was very infatuating, to say the least, because these experiences that we talk about are so hard to talk about in words because they're multidimensional experiences, right? So we try to break them down, and so yes, that was that. But a lot of my understanding and experiences have actually been with myself, bringing in information or visions or telepathy. Like it's hard to explain, but gnosis, things that happen within me versus outside of me. I've had very, so after, in 2013, I was very telepathic where I could know what was going to happen in a room. So I was at a coffee shop, for example, and I thought to myself, these two guys walk in and I go, oh man, I have to buy them coffee today, because I just knew that's what was going to happen. So I was sunk up with them, and that's actually what happened. They forgot their wallet. They're my friends. They're my coworkers and stuff. But I kind of lingered and started talking, and both of them didn't have their wallets, and I ended up buying them coffee. So that's an example of, and I knew that was going to happen. And so when you start to open up to frequencies and messages, and then watch the synchronicities happen, and then play along with them, it's a very joyous way to live life, is to have those experiences. So yeah, I guess there have been, but it really felt like more of a one-way thing instead of a two-way thing for the most part, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, I think for me also there is a lot of one-way. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it does make sense. Well, one-way because there's one way going both ways because this is what I do. I can do that with like a lot of people, but also because I don't always have my consciousness on everyone. I can't put my attention on everyone, but a lot of people will have experiences with me that I have some recollection of or some memory, but I don't have my full attention on it because my human self can't, but my higher self can. But I would say there's like 3. There's more, and probably I would say my daughter, my kids, both kids. Well, I'm really telepathic with my son, and again, that's just his being, but also a connection to us. And then my daughter as well. And it's interesting because she comes in as a daughter in this lifetime, so you've got that bond, and it's hard to delineate. But going back into my teenage years, I talked about my friend Daryl or Daz. That would be my first experience before I was thinking like this. And I did a high school exchange, and I ended up at her house. And her mom, who I'm still like, they were like my parents too. We became very close. But her mom will tell a story of when I got off the bus. I had like long blonde hair and makeup on and girly. And Daryl was a total tomboy, and they'd had bad experiences before.
She's just not having it.
Oh man! But we were so close, like right from the moment we were just with each other. We would stay up all night, like laughing and crying, and it was just this really intense bond. And then that was in the country, East Grinstead, and then. My other students, we had to go into London for a week before we came home. She was so upset about the pull away from me. She got all the other students from the school in East Grinstead to skip school and go into London for teenagers just to do this without telling their parents was like huge, so she could see me again. And then, of course, the teachers found out, and they were getting the UK students on the bus, and they had to pull her away from me. Like, it was intense.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was before email and all of that. So we would write letters, but we would never send, like, we hardly ever sent the letters. But then when we would connect, we knew everything. There was never anything to catch up on. It was so wild. And then she did end up dying, which I said, and I was with her for the last week before she died. I had just come back. And that week was the same thing. It was like we put this bubble in. She was on her deathbed when I got there. And then she got to drive her sports car with me in it while I was there, go for walks. I mean, she couldn't get out of bed before I got there, but there was something about us that gave, her dad hugged me and said, thank you for giving us our dads back, because they got this week of her being alive again. But even when email came in, we didn't use it. Like, we're like, oh, cool, now we can write. We didn't even use it.
You didn't need to, right?
It was like, so that was one. And she continues to be with me. And then my next one would be the one that I would say was like that really close connection. And again, I mean, it sounds kind of tragic. This isn't going to happen to all of you, but he's crossed over since too. But we had a lot of years together. And when you were saying, these conversations, the telepathic, he opened me up to so much or our connection did, because we could teleport with each other easily. We could see, and it was so natural for him. I remember once he yelled at me because we would have these conversations, and then I'd go and see him in person, and I'd think, I should repeat what we said. And I just remember him yelling, he's like, will you stop repeating what we already talked about? Like, come on. So he was really good at pushing me to, and then we had incidences where I could feel him and, all of that. So, and then I have one more that happened in the last set. So by this point, I was really used to it. When I connected to this other friend, and it was more new to him, but so we would practice a lot of the telepathy, and we used, and this is a cool thing to say because it might be something people want to practice now that texting or messaging is a thing. So we would just have our conversations in our head and then use the text message just to sort of anchor it. And he wanted to try things like, okay, what am I thinking about now? But the thing with that is that's already in the past, because as soon as you ask someone, what am I thinking about now? You're thinking about if the person can figure out what you're thinking about. So it doesn't really work. So just to give you guys, like, if you want to play around with a telepathic connection, I found through him, we found that it was much better to just answer a person's question on text if you heard it, or so it happened, and I think that
so you can practice, right?
Yeah,
just
so
to make sure
it just gives you that reassurance. But
right.
As soon as you start trying, you can't, and that's one of the lines. I don't know if it's in this episode, but it's something like, it's not something you try for, it's something you allow. I think Jonas has some really good lines, and I'm pretty sure Jonas says that at some point. Like, you can't make this happen; you have to allow. So, like, if you're practicing with friends and you want to, like, try to make it happen, it's not going to work. But if you allow it, and when you get that little urge of just something random that you're going to say to that person, then you tell them. And with him, like, I could always tell when he was drinking, or he would, because we would instantly feel it in each other. When he went to Amsterdam, that was crazy for me. I think even the distance makes a difference. It actually makes it stronger, which is interesting with these guys around the world. If you see, when they start coming together, they don't rely on it as much because they're talking to each other. But when he was in Amsterdam, it took me a couple days to realize what was going on. But just from him being in that energy, I was like high, and I couldn't break from it. Like, and I didn't know what that was. Like, it was
I think
just
we went out to a book signing that week too.
that was not good.
So you were in public, and people, at least one person noticed.
Well, that was a different week.
Oh,
actually.
okay.
And that was when he had moved away and came back to town, and he was out partying and got really drunk, and I started acting. Like, luckily, you guys knew what was going on, and you were.
Well, I'd been with her that day, just so you know, and unless she was squeezing some hooch in behind my back, she was sober, but not really.
It seemed like it. That it's cool, but frustrating too. But luckily, you guys kept me good and professional.
Yeah, as much as we could. It was a good day.
Stop linking into me.
It was a good day. So neither of us really had any opening experiences like they're demonstrating in the show, and we gave you some examples of some connections that we've had in our life. Now,
hey, I want to hear from you guys, so hit us up on Twitter at live_sense8, and you can DM us if you don't want to do it public, but let's talk about, I want to hear about what you've experienced and how you interpret it, and if you've tried to have telepathy with people and it worked, or if it just happened spontaneously, if you've had a deep, whether you called it a soul connection or a cluster connection, if you felt lonely. The other thing is if you start to notice this, you have emotions, and if you don't know your cluster or your soul connections, you don't know what they're going through, and so sometimes your emotions aren't even yours, which we see in this. But, I've had emotions and then talked to someone later and realized, oh, that was yours. But we're so used to interpreting it as us. So that's interesting, too.
So let us know. Or if you have any methodology that you've experienced or want to share, absolutely hit us up.
So this, obviously this is the beginning, episode 1. We've talked probably forever. And we have so much more to say, and these ideas are going to obviously just keep going through all the episodes. So before we close, Zac, is there anything about episode 1 that we didn't cover that you just want to do?
So there was one thing, as we watched it, I didn't think there was a whole lot of interesting things going on with the characters, but the second time around, when we got introduced to Capheus, his mother says, "Why are you so good to me?" He says, "You are my one and only mother. You are the one who gave me the light and love in my heart." So I thought that was actually a very important line, and I didn't catch it the first time. And you pointed out to me as I said it, because I wasn't even I was thinking about the love and light in my heart. So that's another concept about love and light and being in the heart. And he's a very optimistic character. He's all about today's going to be the best day, so he's very optimistic, and he's got a sunny disposition on life. So I thought that was important, but they just kind of dropped that love and light kind of thing, and it's in your heart, and that's how he kind of leads his life. So I thought that was pretty cool. But then you said, when I read it out loud, you're like, she's not his only mother.
Well, if you talk about that they just gave birth, it's in the same episode.
Right.
Angelica supposedly gives birth to him. And so now, energetically, they're saying he has 2 mothers, or does he? We don't know that.
And they just introduced the idea of you can have a birth family and you can have a soul family.
Right.
And most of us feel that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that. I think we tend to choose birth families that are going to support us in our journey. And sometimes it's because we're close to them. Sometimes it's because of situations or whatever. But I think as we evolve as humans and we have more time to put to evolution and consciousness, people are finding that maybe they don't fit into their biological family in the same way as when they open up to a soul family.
Yep.
I like to think my kids have the soul family and the biological family, but I think every mom probably does. I know my daughter, when she was about 3 years old, and I think she might have been mad at me at the time, but I know it to be true, but she's like, "You weren't always my mom. The mom I had most is still in heaven." And I'm like, okay, so I might not be your soul mom, but I am your mom.
But I'll do my best.
But yeah, I think that's an interesting thing. Do we have soul family and biological family?
Yeah.
One of the things I love in the show is that they show, even with the clusters, they show deep, deep relationships with other members that aren't in the cluster, you know, like Nomi and Neats and Lido, and even Capheus with his mom, like there's a lot of deep relationships that aren't based on this too, and I think that's really cool too, because not always is that the best relationship to be in on Earth, you know, like, I don't know. So I think that's cool. The other thing with this before we close for today is, so Capheus's mom calls him Zebra, or
Zebra
in America,
mm-hmm.
but Zebra. I think, and he refers to that more and more as he goes on, but I think that's the first thing she says to him. And then he says that line about the single mom. So I think that could also show that, because zebras are known for having the black and the white. Angelica's white. Yeah, I mean, you could go into Angelica's white.
Oh, all right.
You know,
mm-hmm.
and maybe that is a signal that, like, oh, he has been more, always, even before.
Right. Well, Lana, she wants to cut those boundaries, and I think that's what it's all about, right? It's expanding our definition of self into those around us through limbic resonance.
Yes, that's what this show's about. Limbic resonance, expanding into all of us. So, actually, having said, I'm opening up to new groups of people. Hey, all of you listeners, I love you. I think it's really awesome that I get to open up to your energies, and you're welcome to come into my dreams and chat with me.
There's going to be a party
Twitter,
after everybody listens to this in the dreamland.
All right. We'll be back with episode 2.
Yes. And if you want to know more about us and our work, you can check out consciouslyawesome.com. We would love to hear from you on Twitter. That's our jam. It's Livesense8. So it's Live_Sense8. That's the number 8 on Twitter. You can connect with us on email. That's team@livesense8.com. And you can check out our website at livesense8.com for more information.
Awesome. And hit us up with messages, questions, comments,
experiences,
so we can share. And if you share an experience and you're cool with us talking about it on air, with or without your name, let us know. If you're not cool with it, you just want to share with us because you're feeling a limbic resonance with us, just to let us know that too. All right. I'm feeling so much love for all of you.
Excellent. All right. We will catch you next time on Live Sense8.